You're right. And Councillor Carr, you're sending apologies for Councillor Berrigy and Councillor Baker, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Good, so we'll accept those apologies.
Ian, can you put the continue so we can get rid of everything?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Dick, so all the apologies. Did we hear from Councillor Gunning? No? Okay. And I think Councillor Drummond is coming to the meeting here. So, so that's it for the apologies. Declarations of interest, councillors? None tonight? Very good. Let's go to the meetings of the last meeting. Someone that was present. Sorry, so moved by Councillor Mutton and seconded by Councillor Brodie. All in favour? Yes. And Councillor Carr has his hand up. We have a quorum, don't we? We have a quorum, good. So we've moved that. So let's go straight to the first item on the agenda, councillors. And this is the investments and loan borrowings held at the 31st of October 2020. And would the staff like to comment further on the report?
I'll just give a brief summary on this one.
Yep, that's great, thanks.
By Gary Ross.
Yep.
Annualised for the year to date, as of the 31st of October, the portfolio is returning 1.96%, which is 1.45% above the benchmark.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
It's good in the sense it's above the benchmark. The actual returns aren't very good, but of course that's just the sign of the times. As of the end of October, we had $65 million invested in term deposits and a further $8 million in floating rate notes, another $6 million in fixed bonds, and the balance was $20.9 million was in cash. If there's any questions on anything within the report, I'll do my best to answer.
Any questions, councillors? Any discussion?
Chair, sorry, Mayor.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention one of the comments in this report is that the council continue to outperform other councils in investments over that period of time. So I just thought that the word the council, I should say the committee, but the councillors and the committee members knowing that.
Well, I think that should be noted then if anyone is going to move a motion.
I don't think we need it noted.
You don't think we need it noted?
No,
but
no, Madam Mayor.
It's good that we've had that pointed out, I think. So we're certainly doing better than...
by year end, how much are we going to be disadvantaged because of COVID? Your guess?
The end of this year, the end of the new financial year. Well, that depends. Look, let's leave that discussion until the adoption of the budget. Because the budget and budget adjustments, address the changed forecasts. So I think we're better off leaving it to that item and discussing it.
It's difficult to say as far as interest on investments is concerned.
I know, just we started the year very fearful, started the period very fearful of COVID, and COVID doesn't seem to be quite as bad as we were expecting. Yeah, that's not a criticism, it's an observation.
No, we'll have a look at that with the budget. As far as the loan borrowings, etc., occurs, of course, the drop in interest rates, our higher return in comparison to other councils is still being held up because of the duration of old investments or old fixed term deposits and the like. The real reality of it is once they mature, then our rates will drop down in line with the rates that's currently being paid with the market, which of course is getting very, very low. It's getting sub 1%. So whereas over the last number of years we've relied on receiving a reasonable amount of income in interest, the reality of it is that we won't be able to rely on interest income to supplement rates over the next 5 to 10 years, or not to the same extent. So it will have an ongoing impact.
I'll note your forecast on interest rates for 10 years.
Well, I'm following what the Reserve Bank, etc., are currently saying. It's not my forecast.
So if there's no further discussion, councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Brodie has moved the recommendation. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Martin. Show of hands to accept that. So Councillor Carr's, is that a no, Councillor Carr? Okay, so Councillor Carr's a no.
Yes,
Or
no,
yes.
I think that sorry, I was on mute.
So 4 councillors in the room have said yes, so that motion is carried. So we'll now go to the quarterly budget review, September 2020. Mr. Good, would you like to speak to this one again?
I will. Just to set the scene, the original budget that was adopted by Council back at the July meeting, it forecast for the year a net operating deficit before capital grants and contributions of $2.4 million. We've done a review of the budget at the end of the September quarter, and there's some amendments that were needed to be made to the budget. Factoring those in, the revised forecast would be a net operating deficit before capital grants and contributions of $11.5 million, which is a deterioration of $9.1 million. Now, there's 4 main reasons for this, and one of those is a non-cash item, and that being accelerated depreciation down at the pool, which has emanated from a reassessment of its useful economic life prior to its closure. You might recall that impacted on the actual result for the 2019-20 financial year. We've had to, the accelerated depreciation was booked over 2 financial years, so this year's share of that has had an impact on that forecast result. The other 3 main factors was during the quarter, Council resolved to make a contribution towards affordable housing at 287 Miller Street. We received 50% of this year's financial assistance grant in June, and we had to account for that in the 2019-20 financial year. We may receive 50% of the 21-22 grant at the end of June next year, but at this stage we're not budgeting for that. And the other one was the carryover of funds for projects that were still to be completed at June 30 of this year. There was $2.2 million of operating expenditure funding, and a further $17.2 million of capital expenditure funding. Looking at operating income at the end of the quarter, it was 2% ahead of budget, which is around $1.6 million. And the main reason for this was that COVID-19, the impact on most of our revenue streams, hasn't been as severe as we originally forecast. It still has had an impact, but it hasn't been as severe as what we forecast. And we're probably going to be even further ahead of budget by the end of the December quarter. However, we need to factor in that when we prepared the original budget, we did so assuming that COVID-19 would have a big impact on revenue in the first half of the year and then return to normal from the 1st of January. Now, that's quite unlikely, I would assume, at this stage. But certainly the first half of the year, it hasn't been as severe. As an example, we assumed that our parking meter takings would be roughly 50% of what they were pre-COVID. They've actually been around 80%, fairly consistent for the first 4 months of the year. I've just checked October in the last week or so, and it's stayed consistent with the trend over the first quarter. So it hasn't been as bad as what we forecast, but once again,
sorry for interrupting, but would that have also been impacted by the Wall Street car park coming online? Because we didn't originally budget for any revenue. So the revenues that we have received on that would have also part of it.
Yeah, but the 80% was just looking at parking meter takings, street takings.
Okay, the on-street parking, not the off-street.
Yeah. So we assumed that, as I said, we assumed revenue would return to normal from the 1st of January. Well, unlikely. So over the year, we're probably going to pick up a bit of extra revenue, but it's not going to be as high as what it looks at the moment with looking at the trend for the first quarter. We're going to do a very thorough review of revenue for the year as a whole during the December quarterly review, and we'll report that back to council next year. Operating expenditure at the end of the quarter was 4.8% over budget, which is about $1.5 million. And that was almost entirely due to that accelerated depreciation of the pool. Had it not been for that, we would have been very close to budget for operating expenditure. Capital expenditure, 11.5% over budget, and that's because of the fact that we hadn't carried over the funds yet for projects not complete as at June 30.
It's a timing issue.
Yeah, it's a timing issue. Now, the original budget was balanced with net transfers to reserves of $6.1 million. Looking at the revised budget now, it requires a net transfer from reserves of $15.7 million in order to keep the budget balanced. And assuming that all of the capital works program is completed by the end of June next year, we're forecasting a reserve balance of $57 million at the end of June, which is quite a bit down on what it has been in the past.
Having said that, we know that we won't have completed
More than likely,
all of that capital works program. We always have a carry forward amount, and that always distorts the first quarter. Because and that's not an issue in practice. It's just aligning the budgets. The reality of it is that we have to budget, that we take a conservative approach and budget the cost of the project before going to tender, for example, and accepting tender. Although in reality, the cash flow from those projects will often cross financial years. So therefore, when we come to the 30th of June, the money that's still left gets transferred to reserve and held in a future capital works reserve or a carry forward reserve effectively, and then it gets reallocated again in the new financial year. And that's the biggest impact that Darren's saying. So what did you say? There was $11 million worth of carry forward works?
It's 19 something, yeah.
19.4 million. 19.4 million of carry forward works. So that's where your greatest change has been in your capital program.
Just one question. With the affordable housing, is that usually recuperated by grants, or does council usually out of pocket for affordable housing?
We're making the contribution from developer contributions. We're holding a fairly significant amount of developer contributions that were originally paid as a contribution towards affordable housing.
It's effectively coming out of those tired funds, for want of a better word.
That's right, yeah.
And it's one, and you'll notice that under the budget adjustments during the quarter, they're the adjustments that council's already resolved. So it was council's previous resolution. Darren, I should have picked this up in the original and didn't. But I noticed that we've got the contribution to affordable housing at 287 Miller Street as an increased operating expenditure. I would have thought it's capital. We'll capitalise the value of the...
We won't, because we don't control the property.
State.
Link Housing controller.
We have the title on.
Oh, well, we'll come back and talk about that. Have that discussion here.
Yeah, do we have?
Yeah.
Who holds it as Councillor Barry? That's a good question.
It's not our asset.
No, well,
It's our asset.
It is our asset.
It is our asset.
And this is why we'll have the discussion later. It's to do with a whole lot of changes to accounting standards. So if you're the owner of an asset, it used to be in your books as an asset. Now there's this issue about control. So and this was the comment that our two external members of our internal audit panel were mentioning, that some of these changes to accounting standards makes it harder to unwind and actually understand what your accounts mean. When you're accounting for assets you control as opposed to assets you own, makes it quite complex.
We'll imagine what we can get up to.
Oh, well, it just makes it a mess. Yeah.
We'll have the asset at a value of $1 in our asset register, but because we don't control the asset, we won't treat the contribution as a capital expense. Instead, it'll be an operating contribution.
Yeah, which, I mean, and that's what the accounting standards say. That's what we have to do. I've got to say it's totally against common sense in my
It is against common sense.
in my opinion. We own the asset.
But this is,
And ultimately we control it.
but this is the standard way.
I didn't pick that out of the audit committee. So
No, I didn't
the
think
old
that one either.
concept of legal ownership is going to become very clouded by who controls the asset.
Yeah,
So we could enter into a 10-year agreement with Link, picking an example, and that would step out of our assets for the 10 years. Then would it step back in after the 10 years?
That's right, it would, yeah.
the other example that was used in front of the Internal Audit Committee was in regard to control over cleansing assets, in particular garbage trucks. We don't own them. They're owned by the contractor, but because the terms of the contract, we actually have to bring them to account as if they were ours, which has been a bit of a joke amongst general managers because a lot of us share the same contractor, and we were wondering if the sum of the balance that each of the councillors was bringing to account of theirs was actually greater than the value of the vehicles. So we're brought to account the garbage trucks as assets under the current standards, even though we don't own them, because we supposedly control them. So,
any further questions?
Just one, because I can't find it quickly. The accelerated depreciation on the pool, how much is that worth in this year?
it's in there somewhere.
Saw it, but I can't.
Yeah, it is here, yeah.
It is in there. Yep.
$2.3 million.
So leaving that out, bring our deficit down to about 7. Yeah.
I declare an interest on, just as I've seen it on capital expenditure of the, no, sorry, it's the capital income, the temporary street closures.
The temporary,
Street closures
oh, okay. Because there was one in your street.
yesterday.
Okay, yeah.
And me as well, I think.
Oh,
It was listed as a-
I know,
Hang on,
but
Yeah, I don't think
well,
so.
look,
that's
there's
not
not, because there's no revenue from that. What
Okay,
we're talking
no.
about is the street play, which is
yes,
that's a council program. We don't
Okay.
charge ourselves. So,
Did it
there's
go
no
well?
issue. There's no issue.
yeah, it was
Oh, well.
fantastic.
Was it?
Very good. I'll brief you after.
Good. So do I have a motion, councillors?
Question?
Councillor Martin, motion for, oh, did you have a question, councillor Carr? Yes?
Yes, thanks. Darren, you mentioned that the fines revenue is 80% when you're effectively budgeting 50. What has been the council rate that have come in? Are there many in arrears? Have there been any delinquencies at this point? And what was budgeted to what are we receiving?
It wasn't fine revenue, Councillor Carr. There was on-street
parking.
parking meter takings. It was.
Sorry.
That's at 80%. Yeah, I haven't got any stats on fine revenue.
No, but on rates was the question. I can answer that if you can, like. We're about 4.65% behind the collection of general rates in comparison to the previous years. So it hasn't had as large an impact as I would have anticipated, particularly the fact that we know that there is no penalty, if you like, for late payment up to the 1st of January next year. So we'd expect a lot of businesses to take advantage of that. It's effectively free money to them. In looking at that breakdown of the 4.65% difference, it's predominantly in the business area, or on a ratio of about 2 to 1 with residential. So residential's is about, from memory, it's about 2.5%, 3% behind, and business is about 7% behind. And overall, we've collected 4.65% less general rates at this particular time than what we did last year. So that has an impact of about $1.2 million on our cash flow.
Okay, thanks. Darren, just another question, and that is, you've been able to look at recutting your forecast for, I'm assuming, the first half of the year, now that you've got those parking fees in and you've got a reasonable picture, as the GM just suggested, on where rates are headed. Will you be cutting a half-yearly forecast as to where we're projected to land?
Yes, yeah, we will be.
Okay, and when will we expect that?
That's in the December budget review, which will go to the February
Council meeting.
Governance and Finance Committee meeting.
Thank you. Do you have at this point an early indication of, and best guess is fine for me. I'm just very conscious at the moment that we're sitting here discussing the budget and the forecast, which is really very positive. I think everyone's probably very cognizant of what's been happening in other councils around, and Central Coast Council is probably one of those that is getting a lot of focus. Just to offer some form of comfort as to where we might be sitting, your best guess at this point.
Yeah, I'm confident that we will, actual revenue will exceed the budget for the year. It's difficult to say at this stage by how much, but
absolutely fine. You'll exceed for the year.
Yeah, I'm confident we will.
Thank you. That's a great answer.
Okay.
Again, an amazing result compared to other councils, and
we were probably a little bit pessimistic with our
Yeah.
original projections.
yeah. That's
Obviously,
better than being, that's better than
We
being.
always err on the side of
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah, the only thing I would just balance this out with everyone is there's a whole lot of uncertainty. So while we're doing well, and we'll continue to monitor this really closely, I mean, the fact is everyone has a very positive outlook on COVID at the moment, but it's impacting on both the expense side and our revenue side. And as Darren mentioned, whilst we haven't had the reduction in some of our miscellaneous charge revenue, in particular car parking and the like, that we anticipated, we also know that we're not going to get the same amount of revenue that we normally would. We're not going to return to the same levels in the second half of the year, which we had in our budget presumptions allowed for. So there's a myriad of things that will come around. And the other things that are yet to see is a flow through on expenses. Obviously, there's been a lot of extra cleaning and maintenance. We don't know what's going to happen in the second half of the year, as there's going to be more of a call on local government to support the recovery. So we need to see that flow through. We also need to see the flow through on the likes of our investment property returns and returns for footpath dining and the like. I know that that we're accruing significant arrears around in those areas. So that will actually have to be looked at in more detail in the half-yearly budget review.
They will be facing significant insolvencies at the end of first quarter.
Well, we could certainly face significant defaults on those type of payments. So we have to monitor that.
Any further questions, Councillor Carr? No.
Thanks.
So I think Councillor Mutton, were you going to move the motion to accept the recommendation?
I thought I had.
We sort of got halfway through, and then Councillor Carr had a question. So we'll formally just, Councillor Mutton has moved the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brodie, all in favour? That's unanimous. Good. Oh, well, unanimous. Good.
And thank you very much, Darren.
Yeah.
Well done.
That's the 3.3, the Q1 review of the operational plan.
I can talk to that one.
Yeah.
We are tracking well at 95% of the 258 projects that were either continuing this quarter or commenced this quarter.
Yep.
Of the 5% that are behind, they're all amber status. So we have none that are red, which means they're all capable of getting back on track in the coming quarter or per their scheduled due date. So yeah, it's pretty good. And there are 3 that are unfunded, as in there are projects in our plan that go over multiple years. 2 of them are in EPS and they relate to public domain master plan implementation. So there was funding in the previous year, but there is none left in this year for them to do those works. And the other one is the website. So in case you're looking at a black and white copy, they're the darker ones that you'll see there. Otherwise, there is throughout there some suggestion of where COVID has impacted. It's positively impacted on level of participation in community events that have been transferred online. So in fact, I've seen higher numbers of participation than you would in meetings or workshops that had a set capacity for a face-to-face event. It's probably some of the key highlights.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Carr, do you have any questions? Any input there?
That's good.
If there's no further discussion, do I have a motion?
You do.
I'll second.
Moved by councillor Mutton and seconded by councillor Keane. Just a show of hands. And that's unanimous. We now go to the review of the Code of Meeting Practice. So, Jenny, we'll just run through the main changes here.
Well, Madam Mayor, I'll just make a comment. To my knowledge, and Ian, please correct me if I'm wrong, there is no major changes. These really are predominantly grammatical changes and changes in cross-referencing. It was noted when we did a number of reviews or started to use the Code of Meeting Practice because of the way the original Code of Meeting Practice was set up with optional items that you could elect to bring in or not bring in as a result of the ones that council chose to bring in or didn't choose to bring in. Some of the cross-referencing numbers were out. So the main change from here is actually just correcting all the cross-referencing. There is no change, to my knowledge, that makes any change of substance.
But no material change.
No, we just had to put a clause in there about how we would webcast the meetings, and that's
and moving by exception.
and also the order of business is just expanded a bit too, just to
particularly to address the adoption of items by exception.
Oh, okay. And while we're here, councillors, I thought it was a good idea just if everyone could go to page 33 out of 46, which is about questions of order and questions of acts of disorder. I think it just might be a good time to just quickly reflect on those particular clauses there. You know, I'd have to say, as the chairperson, I'd certainly thank the councillors sitting at this table and Councillor Carr's present for their participation in mainly very orderly meetings. And we do have to remember that these meetings were all webcast, and when we have acts of disorder on the floor of council, it is observed by our residents and really brings down the tone and the reputation of our council. So I was just paying particular notice to the questions of order, and looking if the chairperson, it's myself in this case, if I rule someone out of order and ask for a comment to be withdrawn and an apology issue, then if you notice in 5.7 that does need to be obeyed. So I think it's good to reflect on that if the chair does ask for an apology, that actually must be forthcoming. There should be a withdrawal of the comments made and an apology. And again, our residents are looking at this, and in the heat of the moment, anyone can make an inappropriate comment, but I also think it's very good that there's a prompt withdrawal and apology. And if we look down on the acts of disorder, particularly D, and just remembering that if you look in D, that you can't insult or make a personal reflection or put forward a suggestion of an improper motive about a fellow councillor. And I think it's very important to just read those words again and reflect on that. And on E, that if a councillor says or does anything that is inconsistent with maintaining order at the meeting or is likely to bring the council or the committee into disrepute. And I think we, from time to time, do witness interruptions when another councillor is speaking, and that certainly does not help the efficient progression of the meeting. So then over the page, the next bit is if the chairperson asks the councillor to retract and apologise, then that should happen very quickly, and then the meeting can just continue on. And it's in everyone's interest that we have order at our meetings, because it just means we get through the agenda more efficiently and get to go home in a timely manner. And a little bit down there, expulsion from meetings. We haven't had anyone expelled from a meeting yet. It does require consensus from the councillors to expel another councillor. But, you know, I guess if any particular councillor on several occasions causes disorder to the meeting, that is something that councillors might want to reflect on, that 15.16, that a councillor can be expelled.
No, this is turning into a lecture. Can we
I think it's important to note it. Yeah, no, I think this is what these committee meetings are for, Councillor Martin. That's what these are for. We don't often get a chance to get together to discuss these things. And I have to chair the meetings. When there's disorder, it's very difficult. So this is my opportunity to have a say about the conduct of meetings. And that was all I had to say about that. And if we all just remember how we should address our fellow councillors and staff. Any other discussion on the Code of Meeting Practice? I think we all acknowledge it's working well with doing the matters by exception. I think that sped up the process, and I think now we've got used to that. That's working quite well. With those comments, I'm happy to move that one.
Second that.
Seconded by Councillor Drummond. Show of hands. Everyone's acknowledged. Councillor Carr's got his hand up there. And that is done. We now go to the amended Code of Conduct, the precinct office bearers and members post-exhibition. Jenny, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I was just going to summarise that the issues that the code is attempting to address that previously weren't addressed by the code were identified prior to the decision to commence the review, but we held it off to co-exhibit with the discussion paper so they could be looked at together. Despite it being COVID and all precincts being aware, we didn't have submissions from all of the 18 active precinct committees, but we did get them from 11. Overall, the submissions are largely in support of the majority of the amendments. Page 4, under the detail, just summarises that the largest amount of submissions we received were in response to section 2 of the code being key responsibilities, and that was regarding office bearer terminology that we discussed further on, and 15, the relationship between councillors and staff and the precinct committees. And it was in regards to how
convener as opposed to chair,
although a number of submissions did say that they were in a sense a form submission, and it was written by originally written by a precinct that had chair versus co-convener, and we do have 8 out of the 18 who do have either co-chairs or co-conveners. So there is mix, but yeah, moving it to conveners was going to streamline it for us and in line with the Combined Precincts Committee. And then under section 15, it was, we put in here clarification of the order of requesting a speaker at a committee meeting based on the roles within the council, being the general manager and the mayor as the first port of call. And there was some feedback in response to that. So overall, it was largely in support. We did make some tweaks. The overall length was of a concern to some. We've done our best to reduce it as much as possible by taking out any redundant or repetitive text, and knowing that although it does increase in total from 8 to 12, it is inclusive of an appendices that obviously wasn't part of the original one, and at a later date we would look to move that to the updated guidelines for the precinct system. I think that's really the key one. There was some feedback in regards to social media, asking where did we get the suggested clauses from, asking if there was any sort of set guidance from either the state government or LG New South Wales, and the answer to that was no. It had been taken from best practice for not-for-profit committee groups where there was some guidance available. There was a minor change with voting on resolutions at section 13. It should have been voting on motions, just to correct that minor change. Office bearers we've talked about, and 15 I don't think I can add much more to that. So in saying that, the recommendation is to endorse the code post-exhibition attachment 1, knowing that stage 2 of the precinct system review is soon to commence, and should there be any substantial changes that come out as a result of that review, the code can always be looked at again in due course, but adopting it now will enable provisions to be put in place to identify issues that had been raised with council by precinct committees and individual members of committees to address issues that were currently not covered by the code.
Can I ask a question about conflicts of interest, Jenny? So how often, because at precinct meetings you've got people talking about things that are very close to them, but from time to time I have been a bit concerned about conflicts of interest. So are they declared very often at precinct meetings?
I think it's in context of what the issue is.
And how can that be encouraged?
Well,
I do have concerns sometimes.
The code of conduct for precincts actually addresses, and there's a section in there on this, and this is a little bit different from council, because remember they're not actually a decision-making body. They've got no capacity to
make a decision.
not like council, for example. And because of the nature of them, they're predominantly an information sharing group. Essentially, the precinct system predominantly is established to help facilitate council providing information to local residents and the residents providing it back. Now, what it says in the Code of Meeting Practice, which takes a reasonably common sense approach, I think, it identifies that by its nature, by the fact that you're all going to be living in the precinct, it's expected and assumed by everybody there that if it's a matter purely of proximity, then it's not. Then there's no need for them to declare a code, because it can be presumed. I mean, you're only there because you're living in those 4 or 5 blocks or that area covered by the precinct. So if there's something happening in that precinct and you live in the precinct, it's common sense that you're going to be in close proximity. It's really the declaration of interest only becomes necessary, as it says in the code, if there's a pecuniary involvement at all, then it must be declared. So it's a little bit different to how that might happen within a council meeting.
Just say, for an example, if an office bearer is sort of leading the charge and organising petitions and lobbying very strongly around the neighbourhood and bringing this to a precinct meeting about a development that if it went ahead, they would suffer some view loss. In my mind, that's a conflict of interest, but
They only have to declare it. And remember, they're not making a decision, that which is quite distinct from council. Effectively, what they're trying to do is garner support to make their case known to council.
That's the process.
And that's the process.
Yeah.
That's what it is. But mind you, I've got to say that shouldn't be the process. I mean, the process, and there's a separate section in there about development applications from memory, where they shouldn't be using that the precinct as the forum to raise their individual concerns. They're matters that they should be raising through their submissions to the Planning and Environment Group. And they shouldn't be raising those precincts and feeding them back to council, because we're also not the decision maker.
Actually, one issue that disturbed me a little, and that's 4, and it's
which
gives some benefits.
Yeah.
You've got, not you, in there it says that developer that could appear to gain someone at an advantage. I would have thought all gifts should be banned. It's not an issue as whether they could or could not appear. And when you get out into the broader world of bribery and corruption, those words wouldn't survive. They would simply say to the employee, if you're getting a benefit that's not contemplated by your contract, then that's a sackable offence at that higher level. So I just, my concern is that understates.
Think it should be worded differently, Councillor Kane?
Or remove the example?
I'll just simply make, but no one should be accepting gifts or benefits.
Yeah.
Full stop.
They cannot.
Yeah.
It should not.
So
You should not.
change it.
Similarly, as a precinct member,
The
you
issue that they
should
could
not.
appear
Yeah.
seems to bring in some discretion, and I just simply say they should not be accepting gifts or benefits.
So get rid of the example
Get rid of the
altogether.
qualification. And then you could put the onus back.
Or
on the
should we
person
say
who
must
does
not?
it.
Should it be must not rather than should not?
Yeah.
Must is still, you can do it. If you cannot, that's zero tolerance.
It must be. See, if you think of the philosophy
Cannot.
behind it, when you engage someone,
Kids, you must not.
that's the contract that sets out their entire benefits, be
And that is duplicate.
it
You should not isn't
whatever.
very strong, is it?
Look, I believe both the example and is appropriate, because it says that it's not acceptable to do this, and not with qualification. It's just not acceptable for a precinct committee to accept from a developer who has a proposal in their precinct and offer to take precinct members to a restaurant or provide refreshments to the members. I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward.
These examples came up at some point in time and were added in, and it was
So
prior
it's
to
from practice.
Do developers
The problem
ever?
is you don't need ambivalence in this area.
Agreed, but again, we've got a practical reality about the difference between precincts. Again, they're community groups or community members. They're not making decisions,
They're volunteering.
and then they don't have an ongoing involvement. So a councillor or a staff member is a councillor and a staff member all the time, being paid. In the case of a staff member, having a token payment in the case of councillor, but nevertheless they're a councillor all the time, so they have to be on guard or conscious about taking anything from a developer. We have developers in the community that are just part of the community, so we can't word it in a way
And attend meetings.
that because somebody is a developer, they can't give a gift to their neighbour, and while the neighbour's a member of the precinct. They couldn't do it to a councillor while the person was a councillor.
So you and I have got a philosophical difference here.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
I would be very black and white on it, and I'd be black and white right through the administration.
Okay. Yeah, but I suppose that's part of the difference about trying to draw the line, and that's the other side of this coin is why we're trying to show that what precincts are and are not.
Yeah.
Because they aren't decision making,
No, they're not.
and the use of convener
to be.
rather than chair is deliberately used convener to show that the chair is in a position that has a level of authority. And so we need to break that view down.
So we're going to go with convener?
Yeah.
Could I just Could I just ask, I mean, another complication, which I don't know it enters this directly, is if the precinct is staging an event, which is something I've got experience with, somebody may gift balloons or toys or lollies or whatever for an Easter hunt or whatever. Is that automatically excluded as well?
No, because that's a gift to the precinct in the same way.
Okay.
So you're saying gift to the precinct, not to the individual?
It's the individual that I'm getting very focused on.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm just making sure that we don't blunder across the boundary, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
The only other thing I would say from here is this isn't something, as Jenny mentioned, when there's been an issue or where we've had issues in the past have been dealt with and the examples are drawn forward to here. To my knowledge, it isn't an area that has been particularly problematic with precincts at all. By and large, we've found people are very good and they'd err on the side of contacting engagement to seek advice. So, I wouldn't see it as an issue that we need to make some sort of strategic change because we have a problem.
There's no problem to address.
Yeah.
Councillors, any other input, questions, concerns to be raised? Do I have a mover then? Councillor Brodie has moved it. Councillor Drummond has seconded it. All in favour?
Yep.
Good. And so on screen, hands up as well. Excellent. So that brings us to the end of the meeting, councillors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again.
Apologies for being late. There was slight confusion of getting on.
And sorry, just before, Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, just taking a half step back before we do declare the meeting closed. Councillor Barber, I should have asked whether you had any interest to declare, given you joined partway through. No. Thank you. That was just, I didn't think so. It was just for the record. Thanks. Thanks, Madam Mayor.